Right, well, it's 2 o'clock, so perhaps we can start. First of all, thank you for attending and coming to the Over and Scrutiny Committee. We have a slight problem, is that we're actually not quorate at the moment. Mary Whitby is obviously delayed. She is coming. And Michael and Stanley texted me to say that there's a problem with the trains, or points, I should say. Oh, we are quorate. Don't pause now. Take a breath. But anyway, the Vice Chair, Michael and Stanley, won't be here to probably help us too, because apparently the points have failed at Piccadilly Station, so he's going to be delayed. So, but we're quorate, so we will continue. And can I give my apologies as well for missing the last meeting? You know, I had an operation in my foot, not a serious operation, a very minor operation, and I planned it so as not to miss any meetings. And then 3 hours before the operation, it was cancelled. So it threw all my plans into disarray. So obviously thanks to Councillor Wynne Stanley for standing in my stead, and I'm up and running. So on to the agenda. First of all, apologies.
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Dean of Bolton, Councillor Homer of Tameside, Councillor McAllister of Stockport, and Councillor Waters of Stockport.
Then we've got Councillor Greg Stanton, who's a substitute member. And as I always say, I'm eternally grateful to substitute members. You know, it's a difficult ask for all of you, but it's amazing how many people actually do turn up and contribute exceedingly well in these meetings. So many thanks for standing in. Chair's announcements and urgent business. I'm not going to read out the names to embarrass anybody, but a number of members still haven't sent in their annual register of interest forms. Now, it's not just the declaration of interest that you have to do, if you like, for any particular meeting, but this is an annual interest which you will do for your own councils. But because this is a separate legal entity, we have to have a separate annual register of interest for each member. So if you haven't done it, can you do it as soon as possible and send them in to yourself?
Myself.
Okay, or to Joanne. Fine, good. Within that, by the way, I've been asked to make mention that should any member wish to exempt any information, they must submit a request to the monitoring officer. Welcome to Jim Taylor, who's the Chief Executive of Salford CC and Portfolio Lead and Chief Executive for Economy, and ex-Chief Executive of Rochdale Borough Council. To Derry Greenhalgh, who was the Leader of Bolton Council and Portfolio Lead for Culture. Alison Mackenzie Folan, to arrive from 2:30, the Chief Executive of Wigan Council and Portfolio Lead, Chief Executive for Culture. You're here already, in fact. So many thanks for that. Well, are there any declarations of interest with regards to the items on this particular agenda? Okay, thank you. Minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of July. Is there any comments that any members want to make about those minutes? Well, in that case, can somebody recommend that we actually, as I wasn't there, to approve the actual minutes of the meeting? It's a true record of what took place. Okay. So can we approve the minutes? Yeah. Thank you. And the points of action there on the action list, and things are moving through in terms of information that was we requested by members of the committee. The next thing is that cricket in Greater Manchester, and I'm looking forward to this, being an avid cricket fan. So, Jim Taylor is going to lead on this. It's a report as well of the Mayor, Andy Burnham, but he unfortunately can't come today. So if we could just go ahead then with Jim and whoever other officers are going to help you with regards to this.
Thank you, Chair. Just introduced to my left Nick Fairclough, who's done all the work on this, so I'm the front man and a poor substitute for the Greater Manchester Mayor, but I'll do my best anyway. Sorry that this report comes after England.
I know, because I was there.
You'll have read the report. The aim is to agree a long-term partnership to develop the sport of cricket in Greater Manchester and to use it as a tool to deliver the long-term ambitions for the city region. There are a number of partners involved. This came from a conversation which Andy Burnham himself brokered between the ECB, the English Cricket Board, Lancashire Cricket Club, Chance to Shine, which is a cricketing charity, and Cheshire Cricket Board, and also Greater Sport. And that's quite a key partnership. And essentially, the partners have come together to create an action plan which focuses on two areas, which is in section 2.1, community-run cricket facilities that provides access to cricket in non-traditional settings. And secondly, delivering a range of cricket programmes which are focused on providing wide-ranging benefits for communities across GM. There are details there in 2.2 about some of the, I suppose, capital aspects of this initiative, installing 100 new non-turf pitches to reduce inequality in access to those sports facilities, and not insignificantly building 3 urban cricket centres that are going to become sporting and social community hubs. And the rest of section 2 goes on to then talk about various programmes that we're trying to deliver in schools and also across the region for young people and those who don't have access to the sport. The urban cricket centres is outlined, or the concept is outlined in section 3. There is one that is in the UK, which was the first one at Waltham Forest, which was opened very recently on the 26th of June this year, and that's in section 3.4. And then in terms of where will these urban cricket centres go, that is up to the English Cricket Board and local authorities. What the CA has done is basically just brokered this partnership. In 3.8 there are 6 districts that have expressed an interest in an urban cricket centre. GMCA will be making no decisions on where these centres will be. That will be up to the English Cricket Board and the districts themselves to have a conversation about suitability and the bid, and that's outlined, I suppose, further down. So it's a very exciting initiative. We are required to give a £600,000 contribution over 3 years from the Combined Authority, and the host districts will then have to, if they wish to host one of these urban cricket centres, they will have to contribute in a way. Section 4.3 outlines the programmes that the £600,000 from the GMCA will be delivering, and Section 4.4 outlines the installations, for want of a better word, and initiatives that the cricketing partners will be providing. So 4.3 there you can see there are 14 Chance to Shine, the charity street projects. 200 new primary schools will be teaching cricket, through social skills through cricket. There'll be a Healthy Heart Schools programme, and then 20 secondary schools will be involved, and then there'll be a number of employability programmes to supporting young people not in education, employment or training. So that's the funding that the GMC contribution is going towards, whilst in section 4.4 the cricketing partners will be installing the 100 non-turf pitches, growing a female activators programme in the South Asian community, and providing 5,000 tickets per year to RPass, which is the Greater Manchester Mayor's opportunity pass for young people, which not only includes the bus travel, but also working with Sharp Futures to encourage business, private sector, public sector to open up opportunities to young people, which has been well publicised, I think. And also piloting and launching the 100 Clubs and Schools programme, and apparently the 100 is a new format of cricket, which is coming forward shortly, which the Chair will probably know all about. And then the next steps are the detailed plans are going to be developed to enable delivery of the programme from summer 2020. Thank you, Chair. That's all I wish to say. And Nick's going to answer all the difficult questions. Thank you.
unfortunately, some of our traditionalists are not particularly in favour of the 100 overs, 100 balls sort of format. But if it gets people, children to play cricket, fine. It's a wonderful game, and it's. I'll throw open a question to the committee. The one thing I would say, what I like in particular about this, that if you look at the English cricket team at the moment, a disproportionate number of the team, those who are educated in the UK, have gone to independent schools. Not enough state schools play cricket. And in the past, some of our greatest players went to state schools. And therefore, I think anything we can do to actually promote, what, is one of our national games, I just think is fantastic. There are all sorts of benefits that can happen there, but that's a personal view, that is. I'll throw it out to questions, and Councillor Meredith, Danny is first.
I don't want to bowl out this report, but thought I'd get me put in quick. Anyway, having a look at the report, absolutely amazing. I think it's brilliant. The problems I've got is over a couple of years, we see these, I don't want to call them vanity projects really, actually rolled out across local authorities, Greater Manchester, and we don't see the longevity of them sometimes. We see them, it's great to see that we've got 3 years of funding from the GMCA, which will unlock £3 million, as it says in the report. But after that money runs out, who funds it? Are we looking at local authorities contributing money into them? We've got local authority cuts going on right now. I just don't want to see this be put out there. I think it's brilliant that we're promoting, cooperation with schools and businesses and other local enterprises. But the problem is what I see is I just don't want it to be seen as a vanity project, and then 3 years or later down the line, these urban cricket, sorry, I've got what they're called now, urban cricket centres, there we go. These urban cricket centres basically end up dying out, and we have to look at different opportunities to actually bring in, say, get rid of the cricket ground and then end up putting football ground in there. And, and this is what I say, I want to see a commitment to longevity after this report, after the 3 years, say after a 5-year plan. And I just want a commitment to see that we do actually have funding from different places going in the future, and it's just not to fall on local authorities.
Yeah, okay, so just a few comments on that. Within the action plan, there's a theme about sustainability and I suppose legacy. How can this be sustained? Certainly the urban cricket centres are going to have to be sort of permanent fixtures, and I think the idea is that it won't just be a particular cricket centre. There will be lots of community use there, and perhaps linked in with other sports and activities as part of existing facilities or new. But that will be up to each local authority to determine, and clearly if the local authority is putting forward some proposals for an urban cricket centre, they themselves, with their funding, will have to think about their sustainability on that. In terms of the schools programmes, that's, I think, a different matter in terms of, how do you keep these programmes going after 3 years? And that's part of the, I suppose, the legacy element of this programme. But like anything, there is no guarantee of this funding after 3 years, and I completely accept the point. We'll just have to keep the ECB's feet to the fire in terms of their commitment to Greater Manchester in this initiative.
Danny, you make a very valid point. Are you happy with that response, or do you want to come back on that? Because it's the legacy element and the continuity is so important. Actually.
Yeah, and it's like you're saying that the legacy, hopefully the legacy will bring in more money after the 3 years, hopefully. The problem is that I don't want you to come back on this. It's just a comment. The problem is what I see is with the current state of local government finances. Will any traffic, like you say, there's 6 centres there. I'm not trying to say Rochdale can't afford it. I don't. Mr. Holly over there will be able to tell you more about the finances of Rochdale than me. But the problem is what I see is I just don't want this to see Rochdale get it, and then all of a sudden it dies off after a couple of years. I just want to make sure that it is robust enough to actually carry on and not just be a vanity project, because it's brilliant to see getting kids involved in sport and stuff like that. We just don't want to see it end up falling off the end of a cliff, and then all of a sudden about 5 years down the line we've got another vanity project to put out there, and that's the problem I've got with this.
I think, can I just, yeah,
Nick?
Thank you very much for that point. And longevity really is an important point, and it's something we've discussed with the England and Wales Cricket Board and with Lancashire Cricket throughout this. I think their intention, their desire for the urban cricket centres is that they are self-sustaining, so they will operate on a basis that's self-sustaining, bringing in commercial business. And looking beyond perhaps the obvious for different streams of funding. So we've talked with them, for example, about private sponsorship for some of these initiatives, bringing together funding from different partners in the community. So that might be academic partners, it might be with other sports as well. So I think there's a real desire to, like Jim says, provide a legacy through these facilities. I think the other thing that this initiative does is it gives us an opportunity to develop a long-term partnership with these bodies, and by providing this funding we're really setting out our stall with these cricketing bodies that Greater Manchester takes cricket seriously and wants to work together in future and make this work.
I mean, the point that you're making, I think, Danny, is and will be taken up by Rochdale Council, because we would have to look at any money that's been invested in this. You get the seed money from the ECB and match funding, but the council has got to be happy that there is sustainability there and the right return there. So it's if at council level it can't work, then I would suspect the council will not be putting that money forward. And that's the thing, as Jim says, my understanding of this is just a seed money, a Kickstarter, but then it's down to the individual authorities, and so people have applied, but it goes into the detail on how then they relate to and deal with and discuss with the ECB to see what centres are going to be developed. So I think there'll be another level of scrutiny, coming back to our scrutiny committees. Sorry, June.
I do think it's a really good initiative. I do have reservations again about the longevity of it, but I did like, and I just wanted to point out, 4.3 bullet 1, 2, 3, 4, delivering a chance to shine in 20 new secondary schools to improve resilience, leadership skills in teenage girls. Wonderful. And I actually think it's great to actually see that you're encouraging young girls to get involved in cricket, but I would like to see all girls, not just one sector of girls, because girls will become together. It's like football. If you give them an opportunity to shine, they will all come together and to be able to enjoy the sport. So where you've got the Activators programme, can we have an Activators programme for females, for all females, so that we're including everybody? I understand why we've actually got a specific for the South Asian females, but I would like to see him to give everybody an opportunity, all young girls across the conurbation, the opportunity to get involved in the programme. Could you explain a little bit more how young girls would be able to do that if they aren't South Asian?
Definitely. Thank you for that question. I think we can definitely go back to the Cricket Board about that point and about their Activators programme. I know it's a programme they're already operating in Greater Manchester and elsewhere, so it may be that they have other varieties of it elsewhere that they could perhaps look at implementing here. The focus on teenage girls in the point in 4.3 came about, I think, the ECB's been doing a lot of work in terms of getting girls involved at primary school level so far, but not really at secondary school. So this is about ensuring that girls don't hit a cliff edge in terms of cricket provision at the age of about 11, and actually there's some continuity for them. And also from there, they can be linked into some of the broader cricketing world, so with the clubs in the community, with the great stuff going on at Old Trafford. But definitely we will go back to the ECB on that point. Thanks.
Just to add there again, I think we shouldn't underestimate how good some of our women players are in this world. So I mean, they didn't do particularly well against Australia, but now did the men.
That was my point. It's about encouraging all girls to get involved in all types of sports, and so that's why I brought that to the attention. I just think it's a great initiative, but also it's the leadership skills that they will be gaining from this programme that really does, make me think, wow, this is going to be really good and transformational for young girls in the future. Thank you.
Barry.
Thanks, Chair. We've all got in our areas amateur cricket clubs with grounds and pavilions and so on. I just wonder, is there any proposal in here to support what we already have rather than just creating new centres? I mean, it's a nice idea to create new centres, but that will take a lot of work, and finding the sites won't be that easy. Whether we could be more effective to support what we already have and what is ongoing, because amateurs are very keen to recruit young people as well.
Yeah, I think that would be up to the ECB to talk to districts about. So, for example, you know, if you had 2 or 3 amateur cricket clubs in your area, one of these district centres might be at that cricket club, which then forms more of a community facility, as opposed to instead of having your 3 clubs and then you have an extra urban centre. So I think that's up to districts to talk about integrating the concept of an urban cricket centre and the facility into facilities that already exist, I think, which will help then, you know, bring those amateur clubs forward as well.
Susan.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I may be more enthusiastic than some on this paper. I'm really enthusiastic. I've one of Bolton's cricket clubs in my ward that's been there for many years, and because of that, I've got to know a lot more about the other cricket clubs in Bolton. I think the standout is I would actually use the words, you know, I've met men who talk about older men who talk about men my age and say a decade younger who really have had their life enhanced by their engagement at a young age in the cricket clubs. You know, life enhancing and life changing in a sense. You know, they got mentored there. There was a family orientation at the club as well, not just that they went there however many times a week to play cricket. You know, it was a key part of their week, and from there they focused a lot on their education, and they were carrying on in leisure with groups of friends who were focused and interested at the club. So I was drawn actually to the part that does actually reference, I'm very pleased to see that reference to NEAT, not in employment, education and training. And I thought, yes, anything that can be done on that, because I think in that phrase, life enhancing and life improving, you know, for some they will say, you know, getting involved in that cricket club, having particularly males that mentored them, not just about cricket but about life, it meant that they made some of the really good decisions about their lives, kept away from crime, they won't mind me saying that. And so that's probably the origin of why I'm so enthusiastic about this. And I'm thinking about those that, you know, who are so enthusiastic in my ward about cricket that they would want me to be here today, really supporting this. Thank you.
It's actually easy to forget how many successful, you know, amateur cricket clubs there are in Greater Manchester, and the success and standards of quality of the leagues in this area. So I agree, Susan. Charles.
Thanks, Chair. When we see the 6 districts that's put in an expression of interest, it's as though nobody else wanted it. There was criteria set to, and some people didn't make the cut. Is it possible you could share what those criteria were? And the other thing is, would that then, when we're looking to get the 100 non-turf pitches, will that criteria have a knock-on effect with that, or which way are we going to look at the 100, or is it purely with the cricket board that's doing that? Thanks.
So my understanding is that the 100 will be the ECB's decision. However, because it's a partnership of 6 organisations, including ourselves, who are putting funding in, then I would suggest that the GMCA has an input into that. I would have to clarify, I don't know whether Nick can answer this one, about criteria. My understanding was that any of the 10 could have expressed interest, and then you take it from there with the ECB. So I'm not sure there was criteria. I think it was an open...
That's my understanding at this point in time, that it was an open process at this stage. I think it was a discussion for sort of the ECB and districts to take on between themselves. So whether discussions have taken place that we're not aware of, it's possible. But we were trying to encourage as many boroughs as possible to...
I don't think it's too late. If any boroughs wish to put their hat into the ring, I don't think it's too late to do that, to be honest. So we could talk to the ECB about that.
Therefore, for the 4 boroughs who have not got their hats in the ring, then it's down to you to try and, if you like, lobby if you're in favour of this, this proposal. Any more questions?
Yes. No.
Yep. Yeah. Cool. Sorry, Mary. You see that?
No. And it's, as there's only going to be 3 centres, and the problem with having a physical centre is that's where activity tends to come. How are they going to make certain that the benefits of this scheme is spread throughout the whole of the GM region?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think that's part of, if you like, the bid or the business plan that each district will have to put to the ECB. And I would imagine that the ECB would want participation at a very wide level as part of their criteria, because it is their criteria, because they're investing the money for the centres. So I think it's at the behest of the local authority in their own bid. You know, there might be 2 or 3 authorities that want to come together and have a collaborate. I don't know. You know, I think it's, you know, the initiative is with the local authorities to make that point and to try and look at how they can widen that participation across a wider geographical area, I think, and all sections of the community also.
Right, well, in that case, as I say, I've already expressed my personal view on this, but we're asked to note the discussions taking place between the cricket organisation, districts and the combined authority, which we've done. Review the scope of the action plan which is set on the report and what will be achieved by the proposed Greater Manchester-wide partnership with the ECB, Lancashire Cricket Club and other partners. And I think we've obviously aired that around the table. Note the request for 600,000 of funding over 3 years to support the actions outlined in paragraph 4.3 to be sourced from retained business rates, subject to an agreement between the 3 districts and the ECB to develop 3 urban cricket centres across Greater Manchester. So we can note that. And then probably the most important thing of all, engage their own local authorities in the development and delivery of the strategy, including the development of urban cricket centres. And if there are any concerns, then I think at that level it's appropriate to raise those concerns. And I certainly, I mean, it sounds to me like a great initiative, but it needs to be sustainable as well. And I probably would need to understand better the interaction between, if you like, this initiative and schools cricket, existing centres, existing cricket clubs, etc. And I guess where some of the basic coaching skills are going to come from. But I mean, we're blessed in our authority because the leader is a member of one of the local cricket clubs. So yes. So we will see what happens. So, but I think you've got broad support around this table for the initiative, and wish it every success. And I hope that we're one of the authorities that is successful. I'm declaring my hand. Thank you. The next report on the agenda, which was not in the main body, it was sent out slightly later, which is the Greater Manchester Brexit Preparations Update Report. And Jim, you've got the pleasure of doing this as well.
I am indeed. So I've just introduced John Holden, who you've met before. He's been to this forum. John's going to go through some of the business angle of this. Dr. Cathy Oldham here, OBE, who's nationally renowned for resilience planning, is an expert on this. So we're very fortunate to have Cathy in Greater Manchester. He's going to give us an input as well. I'm just going to start off. While Cathy recovers from that, I'm just going to start off at the beginning of section 2, talking about the structures we have in place, and then I'm going to ask Cathy to talk through some of the wider elements of Brexit, and then get John to focus on the economy and business aspects of our preparedness. So we have a preparedness group within Greater Manchester. It's the GMCA, the local authority reps. There is obviously Cathy's team, the AGMA Resilience Unit, GMP, the Growth Company, Transport for Greater Manchester, NHS, the voluntary sector, and also Manchester Airport. They form a membership of a preparedness group. Also, each local authority, as you're probably aware, has received a small budget, and each local authority has nominated a lead Brexit officer, and they are all coming together under Cathy's auspices. And they joined the wider GM Brexit preparedness group as well, so you each have a representative on that group. There is also a multi-agency economic resilience task force which has been established, and you can see there in section 2.3 some of the membership of that task force, which is obviously the subject of this scrutiny panel in any case in terms of economy. There's a growth company, Job Centre Plus, Cities and Local Growth Unit, which of course is a government unit, business representative organisations including the Chamber and FSB, voluntary sector, citizens advice and trade unions representative. And actually to support the work of that specific economic resilience task force, we're currently developing a dashboard of leading indicators to be developed, and that's outlined in section 2.4. But of course, in addition to the economic resilience task force, preparedness are being led by the readiness group and also the resilience forum. And so the preparations are underway in the areas which are outlined on page 3. And Kathy's going to take us through a few of those areas, and then John is going to come in on business and economy, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you. So just to go through some of the specific areas, I think it's worth saying that from a resilience perspective, obviously there's a high degree of uncertainty in some ways about how this will all work through. And so when we're working with this sort of planning, for us it's key that we work across agencies and across sectors. So although for the purposes of the report we're obviously describing specific sectors here, they're all part of multi-agency structures that enable the sharing of information and working together. So borders, ports and borders are obviously one of the key areas of planning. Manchester Airport is obviously a significant port in terms of both passengers and freight. They're very actively involved in all the planning across Greater Manchester. Port Salford and the City Airport are not considered as ports of entry into the UK. So there is significant concentration on the airport. In terms of transport and infrastructure, there's obviously a range of infrastructure projects that we've got to register about and are making sure they're successful. The other thing we're doing is to work on a cross-border basis. So agencies like Highways England are obviously working across the motorway network and the strategic road network. And it may be that the flows of traffic are altered in various scenarios. And so it's important to us that we've got the cross-border communication in place as well. Turning to health and social care, much of the planning for the health sector is led at a national level by Department of Health. So we've not been asked to stockpile or take those sorts of measures at a local level. There is obviously concern about EU workers and helping them with the settlement scheme and making sure that they're registered. And we will also make sure that all our communication and our understanding of what's happening locally is fed nationally and that the national picture is fed locally so that we join the system up. In terms of food, water and energy, if I perhaps take them in the reverse order, the energy and water sectors have been working on EU exit for a considerable length of time and have many contingency arrangements in place. I think when we're talking about food, that's obviously been of great concern in the country and in the media. The real message, though, is that there is no anticipation of a food shortage. There may be some reduction in choice depending on what happens at borders and ports. But the message is that there is not going to be an overall food shortage. And perhaps if I just pick up, I'm going to jump over business and economy because that's really John's, but in terms of engagement with government, for EU exit, my role really is looking at risk, if you like. But the implications of this that may or may not happen are obviously national as well as local. So that join up to the national level is really important. And so we, using our normal arrangements that we would have in the face of any risk really, to talk on a regular basis to government and receive information down from them. And so perhaps I'll hand over to John to look at the business and economy area.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. So as Jim said, the sort of key group that's overseeing this work is the Economic Resilience Task Force, which brings together a wide range of partners. We've deliberately called that an Economic Resilience Task Force, not a Brexit task force, because we think there's, whilst there are sort of risks to business from Brexit, there's also a much broader set of risks we need to be prepared for a general economic slowdown, which it feels like we're moving towards, sort of related to Brexit or not. So that group brings together a number of partners to look at the evidence and the dashboard which we've created to try to anticipate issues before they arise, to plan a coordinated response, and we'll look to mobilise that if and when issues occur. Related to direct support to businesses, that's being led in Greater Manchester by the Business Growth Hub, and this group has seen reports previously on the Business Productivity and Inclusive Growth Programme, which the Combined Authority and Districts fund, that organisations working with a large number of firms every day of the week, and providing support to them to support them to get prepared for Brexit, as well as to coordinate the response with local authority officers as well. I think it's fair to say that up until now, it's been difficult for the Growth Company to sort of have specific events around Brexit preparedness. Businesses have not been particularly receptive to that, so the preparedness is getting picked up as part of the broader business support arrangements which are being provided. That said, working now with government, there is an effort to increase the communications and support being provided to firms in response to the government's commitment to attempt to leave the union before the 31st of October. There is a joint piece of work being planned with government now, which is not referenced in the report because it was just announced earlier this week. The Growth Company has secured a role working with the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy at a national level to determine what that support will be. So I think that's really positive that a Greater Manchester organisation is influencing the national response. That will is providing £3 million of funding to growth hubs across the country to enhance their support and messaging to firms to get more businesses engaged and prepared. I think there's a big risk around the SME sector, and it's that sector which isn't prepared, and the numbers vary, but it's somewhere around a third and a half of SMEs have done no Brexit preparedness work, which is obviously a big challenge. I think there's also broader work we're doing with the Growth Company, looking at how we can ensure that they're in a position to respond to changing circumstances as they happen. So the CA is a big commissioner of Growth Company services, and we've got flexibility there if we want to use it to change some of their contractual requirements to allow them to provide the support that businesses need. Happy to take questions on that.
Okay, Chair, that's all we wanted to say on the report. Happy to take questions.
Very sharp and focused and to the point. So questions, please. And the first one is Danny.
I always seem to get in first somehow. Resilience. I must admit, I've done a bit of work on resilience myself. I can imagine I'm at a SATS level right now compared to Dr. Oldham. But it was just a quick question. I know that you said about working with government. I know I'm not trying to get political when I do say this, but with the Yellowhammer document that obviously had been brought out recently, you say that you're sharing information, you're working with the government. The problem is if the government's not actually giving us the information across that we need to actually build a resilience report, obviously the whole system, I'm using that as a phrase there, the whole system won't collapse, but the actual format of actual resilience doesn't really go forward in the right direction. I've got an issue with what you said within your healthcare when you were saying it was run nationally and we've been told not to stockpile and stuff like that. Can you please tell pharmacies in the Greater Manchester area to stop putting on the windows then that it's not our fault that we haven't got the drugs for you, it's your MP's fault, go and speak to them because of Brexit. And I must admit, I declare an interest in this. I do work in a hospital setting myself. We do have pharmacists and we do have equipment people actually coming in saying we can't get this part, we can't get this medication because it's all being used in other places and there's been a national shortage due to the scaremongering of Brexit itself. So I think it's a good report. We asked for the report last year as well, didn't we? And I'm glad to see it. It's a good, robust report. The problem is I think that going forward, we need more information, especially from government, to do with this, to actually plan properly. Because right now, the population of Greater Manchester and of the nation are quite scared right now because of the scaremongering. And that's probably more to do with the press as well. I'm not going to go into it, but that's probably more to the press as well. But I've just got certain concerns, obviously, with the information that we are receiving, that we can't actually resilience report correctly.
Just a couple of points. I can answer some of that, but not all of it, as you can imagine. The one thing about, I don't really want to comment on the Yellow Hammer document, but what I can say is that there certainly has been a bottom-up approach from government in terms of asking chief executives locally and regionally what our issues are, with a view to trying to collate those issues from a national point of view. So we've been asked in Greater Manchester through the 10 districts, through the chief executive of Liverpool City Council, who's the North West regional lead, to put all our views forward, which have been collated. Secondly, in terms of pharmacy, that is something that we will raise with our NHS colleagues locally in Greater Manchester, so we will pick that up with them to see whether they have any further information about any aspects of pharmacy and drug shortage or stockpiling.
Okay with that? Okay, good.
Thank you, Chair. My question was also about the Yellow Hammer one, but I will leave that, and I was pretty much said flippantly that as soon as you write a report about Brexit, it's out of date almost before the ink is dry. But let's leave it there. The other issue is under the health and social care one. You mentioned about employees in the health service and social care service and so on. But there are many employees probably in this organisation, as there are in several local authorities too. And I either read or heard a report that large employers are specifically helping their staff to register, and they're doing it sort of collectively because lots of people are very worried, and some of them probably don't know easily how to go about doing it. And maybe the 10 authorities could take a leadership on that and see how many staff they have themselves and try to support them to make up their minds which way they want to go. And the other one, I suppose, was is data, which is at the end of this report. I understand when and if we leave, if we leave, then we will be cut off from sort of data sharing with the European Union. And I just wonder how that's going to impact. And policing doesn't come under our area, but issues about policing and cross-border issues in Interpol and so on, that's going to be severely impacted too, which could have significant impacts in a wider sense. And I suppose finally the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which we were supposed to find out something about it and supposed to replace the structural funds, which we make good use of. We hear nothing about it, and I just wondered if that can be firmed up somehow. Thank you.
So I'll take the first part about the settlement scheme. I'll ask Cathy to comment on cross-border police and John on the UK Prosperity Fund, if that's okay. All I can say in terms of the settlement scheme is that being parochial, locally in Salford, we went through all our employee database and identified only a dozen people who might need support around this in terms of our employees. We've also spoken to our other anchor public sector institutions in Salford to do that. And I do know that my colleagues have done the same with that. So in terms of a response GM-wide, I think we've had to have a local response because we've got the information about our residents. But as far as I'm aware, there has been some publicity as well around Greater Manchester and nationally about that. So that's, I think, the first comment I'd make. Police. I think, was it police?
Start with data.
Oh, data as well, yeah.
Data. I think in terms of data, that scenario's been identified for probably over a year now, those implications. So there is a huge communications campaign that started on the 1st of September, a government-led communications campaign. Although it's targeting audiences, residents as well as businesses, the feedback we've received is that 90% of the actions ahead of the EU exit are required by businesses. So that's why we're working very closely with the Growth Company and economic colleagues about reaching out to businesses to make sure that they've thought about things like where their data's held and how it's handled. In terms of GMP, I don't want to comment too much on their behalf, except to say that they are absolutely a key part of all of these arrangements and are putting preparations in place. So I think that's probably as much as I can properly say here.
Yes, on the UK Share Prosperity Fund, not much more to add to your comments. Really, it's been promised repeatedly, and there's been deadlines set for it being for information being released on it, which have been sort of consistently not met by government. We did expect to hear something in the spending round. That didn't happen. The information we've got is that it will be something that will be picked up in a budget, which we expect later in the autumn. But sort of, I guess, past experience is that might well not happen. I think the current European Structural Funds round is guaranteed until 2021, even in the event of a no deal. So we're not sort of at risk of losing out immediately. I think the bigger risk is that the longer it is until we hear about that new fund, it's for planning for it, it's for getting the pipeline through, it's having the certainty of the funding that's really starting to increase that risk for us.
Good. Next one is George.
Thank you. My question is sort of regarding the food, water and energy section. I know obviously you've said that there's not going to be shortages, or there's going to be some shortages but not an overall shortage, but I'm just wondering about sort of the rise in prices and what's going to be done to ensure that there's adequate provision for people who are reliant on food banks and obviously people who need to use their car to get around, so that's care workers and people like that who have to rely on fuel. And if the prices are going to be going up and there's people basically living paycheck by paycheck, what's going to be done to make sure that these people aren't basically going to starve and people are actually going to be able to carry on doing their jobs?
So I'll just make one point and hand over to Cathy, is that there are a number of districts that have discretionary funds which operate all year round for those people who are vulnerable, who might find difficulty in meeting daily needs. And so there may well be opportunities for districts to perhaps enhance that opportunity for a different criteria of resident. In terms of planning for, it's crystal ball gazing. I would not know whether food prices will increase or not. I understand the problem. It's whether there is a solution to that in the short term. I'm not sure. I don't know whether Cathy can offer any insight into that.
Not directly on food prices. I think in terms of food, that sector as a whole is highly flexible and used to dealing with whether it's crop failures or problems in their supply chains. And so actually they tend to be seen as quite a resilient sector. In terms, and they're a very commercial sector. In terms of food banks, however, I think that's an area where we would want to keep very close liaison with all the local authorities and the community and voluntary sector, so that we get a very early identification if there's problems in that sector. and can look to see what support we can be offering.
Just to slightly extend on that, I guess it's something which is being looked at the Economic Resilience Task Force, but sort of resident impact is something which is within that group's remit. Obviously, the UK is a significant importer of food, and that increases in the winter months, and the wheat pound at the moment is going to feed through into higher food prices of some food products. It's not certainly a sort of generalised increase in food prices across the piece. We are working through GMCBO to liaise with food banks across the conurbation. We've now got a map of locations of food banks, so we understand where they are and where there are gaps. But as Jim says, in terms of a response to that, I think we need to wait to see what the impacts look like before we start to put a full response forward around it.
Next, and then Greg.
My question has been slightly answered. Mine was actually on the funding. Again, because we haven't had the information from government in September regarding the Prosperity Fund. But I'm slightly reassured that till 2021, however, most people and most businesses have a short, medium and long-term plans, and so actually when you're trying to grow your businesses, this isn't really giving much assurances to businesses to grow, but also to be able to do the regeneration. And so I'm a little bit concerned because you don't just put a bid in for 1 year, you do it for over a longevity of the programme. So some of this regeneration work is like 10 years long. And so not having this information, do we know how many possible scenarios will be for the combined authority in relation to the stalling of future regeneration projects if we do not get a proportion of funding, or if we don't get any funding? Has that all been mitigated and looked at as well?
I'll attempt to answer that, but Alison Gordon is actually a secret expert in European funding here for another item, but she might want to jump in and correct me. So I was looking nervously when I was answering before. No, I absolutely agree with your points, and those are the points that we've been making very strongly to government. But actually, one of the real benefits we've had from European funding is that 7-year long-term time horizon, the stability and certainty of funding that gives you the ability to develop long-term regeneration frameworks backed by funding to attract a private sector investment on the back of that. So we've been making that case very, very strongly. I think if the UK Shared Prosperity Fund does not come down the tracks, there's no way that we can mitigate that as a set of local authorities. It was worth about £500 million over 7 years, the last European programmes. It's a huge amount of funding, and there's also broader funding streams which government hasn't committed to yet either. So this group's seen reports on the Local Growth Fund again, which was another £500 million fund, which is currently not forecast to come on. There's not another round of that coming on stream. So there is a very, very significant gap in our funding and our ability to be able to fund regeneration and growth locally unless that funding does come on stream. So we're making that case very, very strongly to government at every time we can. I think the reason it's been delayed is not clear, but clearly it's a big decision nationally. It has spatial implications about which places are going to win from reallocation and which places are going to lose from reallocation. So that obviously feeds into the political discussions that are happening nationally as well. So, Alison, is there anything you want to add from the expert's view?
A little bit that's assurance, but then a little bit of background as well. In terms of ERDF and ESF, what we have is a government guarantee for anything that is under contract or almost under contract will be funded through to the end of the programme. Now, the programme ends in 2020, but actually funding continues to 2023 in some cases. So there is a huge amount of activity going on at the moment to get the last of our funding under contract. We've got most of our big stuff away. Government are saying that what they will do is probably from December look to mop up any underspend locally and pull it into something called a National Reserve Fund. And that can be used for larger national strategic projects, but it can also be used for resilience planning as well. So if there is an economic shock, that funding, particularly the RDF, could be used in terms of some of the regen, or the SF could be used for skills. So there's a lot of activity going on. It might also be worth making you aware, certainly for members who are new, we did a paper on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, a kind of Greater Manchester position in 2017. So it has been a while, but that kind of set out what we wanted the new fund to see, and that was very carefully socialised across other local authorities, but also combined authorities, and we'll happily share that was agreed by the CA a few years ago. So it kind of sets out what we would want to see. But as John says, the nub of this will be how you allocate that funding. So.
Thank you. It's just a quick question, Chair, on whether the combined authority is maintaining any sort of register as to the degree to which it considers its 10 individual districts to be prepared or unprepared. Is there any sort of map that looks at, based on the information coming forward to you, whether the impact is likely to be greater or less great in each of the 10 individual districts? Do you have, for example, a map that says next to each one of them prepared or unprepared?
So I do know that individual districts have done their own Brexit, I suppose, audit of infrastructure, of funding that comes through from Europe. Just speaking from Salford and Trafford's point of view, as I've been in both local authorities recently, there are definitely two separate reports for each authority, which really drills into the specifics. So I would say it's good practice for an authority to do that. Obviously, the leader for this is Sir Richard Lees, who again isn't able to be here today. But I do know that these conversations have been taken at the Leaders Strategy Group with the GMCA as well. But I couldn't say that I have an overview of where the impact is going to be greatest, because we just don't have the detail about what's going to happen and what isn't going to happen. So I think at the minute, there is a local aspect to a GMCA preparedness, which I think local authorities should take their civic responsibility in that manner for their own citizens, I think. Do you have a...
Sorry.
Can you add anything to that?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add was that the structures that we've got in place that we described, all 10 local authorities are engaged in those. So I think it's very difficult to say prepared, not prepared, because of the uncertainties that we're dealing with. But in terms of having that engagement, that awareness, and the sort of dialogue that's going on, all 10 are engaged in that.
I suppose the only thing I would ask in follow-up to that is, has there been any assessment made of if there are some districts that are less well prepared than other districts? Will there be an adverse effect on the actually better prepared districts? For example, if the economic shock is greater in some of the underprepared or less prepared districts, if there are greater job losses, for example, in those, that actually places slightly more pressure on the better prepared districts. And has any analysis of that has taken place, or is that simply not possible if you're not monitoring at a GM-wide level?
I'm not sure that's possible, because in different boroughs and districts there are different sectors of the economy, and one sector of the economy might be impacted on more than others, which might happen in 2 or 3 boroughs but not others. So I think it's very difficult to say carte blanche that one local authority might be, because no matter how well prepared a civic organisation is, like a local authority, we're here talking about economics, and the economy takes over itself really in terms of the pushes and shoves of the private sector, and when they will exit the UK, or whether they will close a factory, or whether that, you know, local authorities have very, very difficult lobbying powers and influence on that sort of economic activity, I think. So I think it's very difficult. I would, you know, go back to your local authority and ask the chief executive and the leader what the preparedness is for your local authority.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very valid point. I mean, you know, I'm led to believe that our authority, you know, is taking this by, you know, very, very exceedingly serious. I'm sure all authorities are, and things are happening. But it asks me the question of the detail. I haven't got a clue, and it's a small steering that was dealing with it. It's a very valid point, actually. I suppose it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that we. You know, we're on this particular over in scrutiny committee, and if there are concerns, particularly with regards to individual, particularly big employers in an area, you know, to find out, you know, what is happening in each authority. But it's, I think Jim is right. It's so difficult actually to bring it all together, and it is down in many areas to individual authority, but and clearly to have the right degree of liaison between the authorities, between the authorities in the GMCA, between GMCA and government, and that to me is so vitally important, actually. Jim, you're going to add something then?
Only just the group that Kathy's talking about. Obviously, you know, people are sharing good practice in that group, so one is assuming that good practice is spreading across GM, and that the you know, resilience is better for that sharing, as opposed to just a district doing that on its own.
I'll come back to you afterwards, okay? Susan.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the first thing I want to say is, I, based on my knowledge and ability, and that's important to say, which, you know, is knowledgeable doer, that's all I've got. I'm very reassured by what I've read. You know, this, you know, I did my best to think, what would I ask, you know, as a member of the scrutiny committee and so on, but I thought, well, you know, looking at this, I'm very reassured. But then that raised the point in my mind, for example, about the Economic Resilience Task Force and those that lead on these matters. Do you, you know, get to the point in your day where you think, right, who is that person or body that I now want to, that's, you know, very senior, it might be a company in the world, not just in England, where you think, or you've decided, we want to get some sort of external, I want their view on this, you know, some great brain of, is the city region, is the work that we've done, is the, you know, what is the view of, I don't know, another, you know, sort of experts in the field, is that something that needs to be considered? So on the more basic, for example, I noticed you've absolutely gone for having the GMCVO involved. I think it was George that pushed this thought in my mind once food banks came up. I am highly impressed and persuaded by the Greater Manchester Poverty Alliance, you know, when you look across the footprint of what they do. And when I looked at that, when I was reading my papers coming here, I thought, do you know what? Someone like the head of that, I would like to think is at the table, and I'd appreciate it if those that run the GMCVO would perhaps think that as well. That, you know, who are they sending? I don't know how many people would be involved from the third sector. Hope they don't mind me calling that. But certainly the head of the Greater Manchester Poverty Alliance seems to know the footprint on all those matters extremely well. The other thing, there's a touch on page 4 about engagement, relationship with government. And I was thinking about the public. And I was thinking actually about going forward and the communication, if you like, from those with political responsibility for Brexit is going to possibly be, you know, fundamental change. The report tells us at the beginning, you know, that you're having to consider, for example, Brexit without a deal and so on. And I thought there will be those moments in time, perhaps, when, you know, we end up having, I'm not talking about News 24 or rolling news channels. I'm talking about when senior parliamentarians, politicians go to the airwaves to make public statements to the public where there are matters of great concern. So I'm going to say it, and I'm going to say that whilst I understand why those in elected office like prime ministers and secretaries of state, obviously those are the people we tend to see, I want to say actually that my view is there would be every advantage actually in hearing from the city region mayor, because, you know, the city region mayor is where it's at when it comes. I think a lot of people are reassured to, these days, you know, the size of the country, sometimes the distance from London, the devolution you see, you know, things are operated differently now. We get finance devolved here. I just want to make the case that I think that, for me, there's an argument to hear from the City Mayor on those formal governmental broadcasts. And I know it's a political issue, and that's why I've chosen to say it today. Thank you.
Interesting observation, actually. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are, Jim.
Yeah, I just think the chair perhaps should take that up with the command authority.
Barry John would have been proud of that sidestep.
Just to answer the question around the involvement of businesses and sort of leading experts on this, just to reassure that we are also having regular discussions with the local enterprise partnership and the businesses on there, both in terms of those organisations' preparedness and their sort of wider engagement with their networks. We also had a discussion last week with the Mayor's Business Advisory Panel, which is sort of 20 firms of all sort of shapes and sizes across Greater Manchester to understand those issues. And in fact, some of the things that we're now looking at have come from a business perspective. So yeah, some of the sort of data sharing issues are quite sort of commonly known now, but they really came to us first from businesses who had concerns about that. So we are very much linking into what their concerns are.
Michael and then George.
Thank you, Chair. So regarding business and economy, and as I was travelling about the Northwest yesterday on various motorways, all the matrix signs had been changed to, from the 1st of November, if you're using HGVs and exporting to you, make sure all your paperwork's in order and all the rest of it. I was also listening to Radio 4 yesterday, and they mentioned about a scheme that the EU have, that if you're exporting into Europe from outside the EU, our road haulagers who are exporting need to be registered for that. I understand that government had been encouraging road hauliers to sign up to that scheme. They've now started actually to register themselves. I was just wondering, from a GM perspective, where we do have those types of organisations that do export into the EU from a road haulage perspective, have we been doing any work in terms of actively encouraging them to make sure that they are prepared for the 1st of November, when hopefully we will come out? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's core of what we've been asking the growth company to do in its engagements directly with businesses. It's also something that we've spoken about with the wider business representative organisations, and the GM Chamber of Commerce has a contract for around export documentation and the provision of that. So it has quite a number of interactions with road haulage firms, and again, they're providing advice out there.
Sure. Just as a supplementary to that, yeah. So in terms of the noises that we're getting back from those companies, are we confident that we're in a good position from our companies in GM, that they're ready come what may?
I wouldn't want to answer that definitively in any way. I think if you look at the sort of national figures and the surveying we've done of firms, we would not be confident that all firms are prepared in the way that they should be. I think it was in the Yellowhammer document where it said that lots of firms are now sort of fatigued with preparedness, so have sort of tuned out and turned off to the messages that we and other sources are putting across. So it's a risk we're aware of. We're increasing our sort of communications capacity out to businesses, but can't give guarantees on that.
Conscious of time, there's other things on the agenda, but I had two hands up, but after that we will come to a conclusion. And that was Greg first and then George.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I think Councillor Howarth largely covered my point, which is just around the role of the elected mayor in it. I mean, you're right that Sir Richard Leese is the political lead for this in particular, but I do sometimes feel, and it might say odd to say this as an opposition member, but I do sometimes think we don't really hear enough from the mayor, and irrespective of whether the mayor is from my party or not, I would like Manchester to be out there being seen and to have someone leading on that, and I do think we could hear more from the mayor as opposed to just national government on this one.
Okay, so I've got my borough's preparedness document in front of me, and it's twice the size of Yellowhammer, so I don't know what that tells you. So in terms of, and I know obviously this was produced before Yellowhammer was released to the public, but one of the issues that was raised was about inflation following no-deal Brexit especially, affecting social care providers, and so that's, it was affecting smaller ones in kind of 2 to 3 months, it might put them out of business, and larger ones in 5 to 6. I don't know what kind of resilience is being, whether that's kind of meaning you are going to be putting further effort into building their resilience, because obviously that's one of the biggest things we spend money on as a council. And I think, yeah, that was all I was going to ask. Cheers.
Yeah, well, clearly councils commission that sort of service through their adult social care budgets, and, you know, if there is that element of inflation, you know, councils only offer a certain amount for a particular contract, you know, and I think the risk is national around not only just the sort of residential and nursing provision, but also other elements of the health sector. So if it's going to cost more for care homes to support people and nursing homes to support people, then either the local authorities increase their contract price or those care homes you know, are unable to provide that care. So I don't have any answers in here. All I'm doing is sharing the difficulty that you've already outlined.
Thank you for that very informative report. Good discussion, some very, very good questions. I mean, my take on this really is that clearly, I mean, there's uncertainty out there. None of us have got a crystal ball in terms of all the way forward. And a great example is food. With food, you know, if the government decides to cut all import tariffs on food imported from Africa and Asia and South America, food prices will go down. If there's shortages of foods, let's say from coming from Europe, then the price demand demand equation will say the prices go up. Who knows? But I'm a bit like Susan. I think you know, clearly there's a lot that's going on. I'm encouraged by the sharing of information, which I think, and the communications, which I think is so important, you know, both across the authority, within the authority, with government, with businesses. But there's obviously no certainty in these things, and I think that that's all we can ask of you know, our political sort of organisations, is that you are doing as much as you can do in the best way possible, which, you know, I think you would probably say you are. But I am worried about one phrase that I think John mentioned it, and that is about sort of almost preparedness overload, that we had so many things done for the 31st of March, and now we're going to the 31st of October, or we may not be going to the 31st of October. So you gear up for that, and it all starts again, and it's, for, you know, I used to be in business. For business, it's not helpful. But I mean, I think, you know, as authorities, we can do whatever we can do. There is obviously a lot of work taking place at individual local authorities, at the combined authority, and I think there obviously needs to be the right amount of communication at all sorts of levels, frankly, in terms of how we can help people and reassure people. And some of the things, I mean, the sign, for instance, on the motorways, absolutely right, but there'll be lots of hauliers who don't do any work with Europe. There'll be lots of businesses that do no work with Europe. So, which may be why some SMEs, you know, would say that they aren't prepared. They might argue that they don't need to be. Well, perhaps they do, perhaps they don't. I mean, I don't know. So, but I think, you know, that was a very, very helpful presentation. I think that hopefully people are going to be able to air their concerns, and you know, both local and nationally. And I suspect that given where we are for the next meeting, we might be back in the agenda again, perhaps. So many thanks indeed. We just asked to note that report. So the next one is the GMCA culture funding from 2020 onwards, and we've now got the report of Councillor David Greenhalgh, who's the portfolio holder for culture, and Alison Mackenzie Folan, portfolio lead chief executive for culture. So it's over to you, David, and welcome to your first meeting with your
first one. Thank you very much.
Enhanced status.
Indeed, thank you very much. Try and live up to that introduction. Thank you. So this is the first of two reports within the culture portfolio. The first one asking for culture funding 2020 onwards. The first thing that scrutiny is asked to note is good news. It shows that on the funding that was allocated 2018 to 20, there has been a 39% increase in engagement for all those organisations that were supported. And the second part of the report is for scrutiny to note the revised approach to that GMCA funding. So first of all, it's the continuation of GMCA investment in those cultural organisations and activity across GM. It's that the criteria for cultural organisations bidding for the GMCA Cultural Fund remains the same as 2018-20, but I am just going to read out a paragraph which is very important, as the wording is extremely important, so that scrutiny are exactly aware of it, and it's wording that has took, our officers won't mind me saying, a bit of time to actually come to agreement, so it's very important that scrutiny are aware of it. And it is in reaching final recommendations about the portfolio of grants to award, consideration will need to be given to issues of balance across art, form and geography, and overall resources available. As part of this process, GMCA is minded to consider limiting the amount of funding any single cultural organisation can receive to no more than 15% of the general Greater Manchester Cultural Fund. So that is no organisation receives more than 15%, or we're minded to, but we'll look at all bids. It also goes into detail on the top slicing into a separate budget and at current percentage the non-cultural activity funding currently funded via the GM Culture and Social Impact Fund. This is in no way reducing the amount that goes to culture. This was existing in the cultural budget, but this is just top slicing that amount and separating. It is also ring fencing up to £270,000 of the GM Cultural Fund per annum to GM Culture strategy priorities. That's where it is felt that there can be cross-organisation working to deliver a particular project, and that could be across the whole conurbation, just so there is overall control that where that could be seen to be benefiting, where partners can come together and work on individual projects. And agree that in line with current practice, the portfolio and programme management costs should be, as usual, be found from the GM Culture Fund budget, and that the GMC Culture Fund programme is a programme that lasts for 2 years, that of 2021 to 21-22. So those are the broad and other reports in a lot more detail, but happy for myself and officers to answer any questions.
Before I throw it open to questions, just to note what we're asked to do here, is first of all to note the impact of the first 12 months of the Greater Manchester Cultural and Social Investment Fund, which is obviously relatively straightforward, but then provide views on the proposed Greater Manchester Cultural Investment Fund 2020-2022 structure and process, which will obviously incorporate the proposed revised approach that we've got here, and particularly anything that may or may not be slightly contentious. So I think just we can bear that in mind to how one is phrasing questions, perhaps. So, question, the first one again is Danny.
So, yeah, I remember this report coming to us last year to scrutiny, and I know that there was a couple of concerns raised about different boroughs not getting money, etc. and all that. I can't remember for the life of me what the report said, because I don't have it in front of me, so I do apologise for not actually giving you the specifics what I'm going into about the report. It was just talking about the second part of the report, obviously the revised part of going forward. I just wondered, because I'm trying to think off the top of my head which boroughs it was. I think there was 2 boroughs where there was no money basically going into them. And I know that the concerns were raised, so I'm just talking about if it's a revised report on going forward for the funding. Have we looked at anything where we can actually give money to cultural art within these boroughs? It's just a general question. I know Rochdale did very well out of it. So I'm being a GM scrutineer right now, so I'll let you come back on that one. Thank you.
So I think in terms of investment in boroughs, so I think there's a distinction to make. So where there isn't direct investment into a borough, there still might be benefit to the borough from organisations delivering across. I think we've got something, I think we've got something like 90% of the organisations that we fund deliver across all 10 boroughs. I think there's only 2 that don't deliver across all the 10. So there's that thing there. I think there are 3 districts that didn't receive direct investment into an organisation in that district. In terms of going forward, we will do what we did last time, which is have an open call for applications. I think that, if I remember correctly, in the last round, some of the districts that didn't receive any investment, we received no applications from there. I think Bury was one, I think Stockport was one. I think the other that did put in an application but didn't receive, off the top of my head, I think that's because the application that came in didn't score highly enough. And actually, I think we had 98 applications in total. We were only able to fund 28. So it was really, really competitive. So I think that what we will do, again, and it's in our culture strategy as one of the priorities is to improve parity of cultural engagement across all 10 districts. And that will be one of the balancing criteria, as it was last time. I think it is getting the balance right between fair distribution of provision and quality of provision. And we will, through balancing, try and do the best to find that fit and balance again.
Just to add to that, Danny, that were the points that were exactly that was made last year, that you can never get the equality across the piece, but the point that was made very strongly that all boroughs benefit in some way, from these investments. And the other thing I've taken encouragement from is that compared to the previous funding, it's a much wider distribution now than it was previously. So we're getting there, I think, from that perspective. Do you want to come back on that before I give it over to Jim?
Yeah, sorry, it's just a quick follow-up. So in regards to getting people to apply for that funding, is that through, do you work with the local authorities on that then to say, try and put it out to everyone and say, do you want to, and then did it go through the local authorities or did it go through you? I'm just wondering about the process, really.
Absolutely. We expect it to be largely similar to last time. And last time, what we did was we published the application and then we went round to districts. I think we managed to get 5 districts to try and get evenly spread, where we worked with the local arts officers and they pushed out to their contacts, and we held sessions in the districts with the local arts officers to talk through the application process, what we hope to achieve with the funding, how people might apply, and to give general advice as well. I think we were there, we were available in terms of phone calls, and we pushed out through the third sector kind of organisations, the VCE. I think that there probably will be a similar approach. I don't think, in terms of capacity of the team, that there will be enough capacity to be able to get round all 10 districts. So I think it will be that we will try and hit as fair a geographic spread, but the invites will be kind of joint out through. we definitely went to Rochdale last time.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask about the 39% increase which you've mentioned, which is a stonking great figure. And if I were a business person, I would imagine I'd be dancing on the rooftops and proclaiming it, because look at this. Which might cause me to be a little bit suspicious in that. And I wondered if there's any kind of auditing or verification of those figures, because not every event is ticketed, for example, so you can verify it that way and so on. So I just wondered if you could explain that, which is very welcome if it's in its actuality, but is it the actuality? Or how would you be able to strip out if some of it is just simply caused by an increase in population, and it's not just it's sort of a percentage increase per se of people using the arts, other than just population increase?
Not to marry Claire, but we have had this exact conversation where we've had these discussions. No, it's exactly right, and it is measured on actual engagement rather, but I'll leave Mary Claire to.
I am, when I present a figure like a 39% increase, it terrifies me because there is then an expectation that you continue that increase year on year on year. I think that what we are, so I went through all the kind of figures and as part of the monitoring, so there's the monitoring and then the, but I think that the reason for this increase is that we were able, so the portfolio in the previous, under Section 48, included 19 organisations. The portfolio under the GMCA is 28 organisations. So what I wouldn't expect to see if we funded a similar amount of organisations in the next round is that kind of huge spike again, but we had more money and we invested in more organisations with a greater geographic spread, and I think that accounts for the very significant leap in later years. I wouldn't expect that trajectory to continue unless we had a similar level of increase in investment and in number of organisations. In terms of auditing, we have been audited internally, which was the beginning of this year. Or we got the final report at the beginning of this year. Now that looked at the process that we underwent from consultation on closure of Section 48 through to the first monitoring that fell within the period of the audit, and we passed the audit, and there was a couple of recommendations around monitoring which we're taking forward, and that is more about the behind the scenes stuff, so writing a guide to how we monitor and how we collect data, because at the moment it could be a more formalised approach. So that's, we have been audited. I will continue to.
I'll be disappointed if it drops to 39% next year.
I think it's worth pointing out as well, another issue with this is that there is some of the pots as well, particularly around the top slice pot of 270,000 and within the social impact as well, there is such an opportunity to get match funding from areas as well. So we're leading that this is funding that will lead to further funding as well. So I think that's another important thing to bear in mind.
I think that understanding in terms of transparency is actually so important, actually. Absolutely. It was Greg next.
Thank you, Chair. A moment ago, you guided us to what we're actually being asked to do, which is to agree the proposed revised approach to the GMCA investment. I just want to roll back to the introduction of the report, because I just want to check I didn't misunderstand something. The portfolio holder said there'd been some difficulty in agreeing the report. Is that politically agreeing it between leaders, or is that differences between chief executives and portfolio holders?
No, it's the controversy that was referred to before around the 15%. So it's simply around the wording of that we are minded to look at the 15% rather than giving a further commitment. So that we're still open to the 50. We are recommending that there should be more balance within and fairness within the allocation within that pot. But the wording around that we are minded is one that is that, look, if we are looking at organisations that present their bids and will present them on their merits, and that we will come to a conclusion based on that. So it's not saying, I didn't for 1 minute wanted to present scrutiny that this is set in stone, hence the wording, we are minded.
I think that's important, actually. I mean, I can think this fund in years gone by, actually, in scrutiny, and it was always that if you like, controversy about some of the maximizations of some of the support that we were given. Or to Barbara's organisations, don't get me wrong, but if you want to widen, if you like, things, which I think is going back to Danny's point in a way, then there's got to be some give somewhere. And I think that from my perspective, I think 15% is quite a sensible idea, actually. But clearly, you need to consult on that further and make professional judgments on that. Michael.
Yeah, and I'd like to back that up as well, because I think it is sensible setting a figure but having some latitude as well, dependent upon the needs and the bid that's been put forward. Like Jim, I was very impressed with the 39%. However, a lot of this is subjective, isn't it? So it's very difficult to see how has it actually benefited? Because if I took this public document into the pub tonight when I go out for a drink and go, hey, lads, have a look at what they've been spending your money on. And they'll go, what a load of cobblers this is. They're spending this money on this money on that. And of course, that's not, on the surface of it, that's not the issue, is it? It's looking at that cultural impact and all the other things that this funding's having. So what other measures do we have in terms of looking at the success of the projects, rather than just looking at we've increased the number of people coming to these events and stuff like that? You know, what's the longer term impact of what's of funding these particular projects? So how do we qualitative measure some of that, given the fact that a lot of it's subjective? And when you're looking at bids this time round as well, will you take into account past performance for organisations that have had money previously but perhaps haven't delivered what they said they would deliver as well? Thank you.
I'm going to pass on to Alison with the criteria, but I know you get up to a lot of culture in those pubs. So I'm going to just... and if not, you should be getting up to more culture in those pubs. I'll pass on to Alison for the criteria.
I'm not going to go through all of the criteria, Councillor Stanley, but obviously there's a massive economic impact. So if you look at some of the national figures in terms of what arts and culture can do for the economy, it's actually worth more than the Premier League for the football supporters around here. So in that respect, there is a massive economic case. Similarly, if we looked at another important area for Greater Manchester in terms of health and wellbeing, and the fact that we are taking a completely different approach in terms of devolved health and wellbeing, for the conurbation, there's a massive impact in terms of people's health and wellbeing. So it helps with both community cohesion, but also for individuals in terms of social isolation, bringing people together. So there's a health impact and an economic impact. Within the criteria, we've also got a range of outcomes which sort of touch particular different elements as well. So there's a lot of sort of detail that goes through in terms of making sure that we get great value for money, that we do get that cost per value in terms of what we're trying to look at. So I'm not going to take your eyes to everywhere, but in terms of, and I'm sure that Alison and Marie-Claire and the leader from Bolton, Councillor Greenhalgh, can go through this, but if you look at the sort of cultural outcomes, there's a range of outcomes there, 11 in total, that sort of talks about some of the real detail around this. So happy to explore it further, but you know, it is taken seriously in terms of making sure that we are delivering value for money. There is an independent panel as well, so that the team here, Alison and Marie-Claire, bring in some independents who can operate some challenge and scrutiny in terms of the quality of the organisations, but also the cost per engagement, and making sure that we're getting good value for money from those particular organisations.
Any more questions? June?
Mine's really not a question. Mine is actually a comment. It's about the diversity in which is being put across the whole conurbation, and it's really pleasing to see that it's for all age groups and all abilities. And so to read what is actually out there and what cultural offer is out there is absolutely amazing. So I've got to say, the report is really, really welcomed as far as I'm concerned, and especially, I know I'm here on behalf of Manchester City Council, which is great because that's an economic driver as well, but also in relation, I actually have one of the most deprived wards in the city, and some of the work that you're talking about is actually tackling some of the issues that are so embedded within all of our communities, and it's about how do we work with people and how do we value people, and this report says that we are valuing our residents. So thank you very much.
Any more questions or observations?
No.
Mary?
And it's about, when you're considering bids in the future, it's about looking at their offer to schools, because the school where I'm chair of governors have actually worked with the Royal Opera House, and also with the North West Shakespeare Company, and so some of our children have got to perform at the Royal Exchange or the Berry Met, and it's about encouraging that, because it's not only the opportunity that they give the children, but it's making them aware of how culture can actually enhance their own lives. So that's all I'd ask. Thank you.
Anything else? Right, well, I've got a couple of observations to make. First of all, I thought this draft report of the, if you like, assessment some great stuff in there. I mean, you should be proud of some of the things that have happened in the year, actually, and also in terms of the coverage, in terms of the figures. And I must admit, actually, I'm a bit like Martin in one sense. I mean, a lot of this is subjective, and there are certain things that in the arts that I adore, and other things I don't understand, frankly. But having said that, one has got to accept a wide spectrum of these things. And it is about, I think, sharing things across the whole of Greater Manchester. And I think that it's difficult. Obviously, if people don't bid for these things, then nothing you can do about it. But I think it's making sure people are aware of the opportunity for the funding that's there, which can then benefit all the authorities across Greater Manchester. And I think that you do need to continue, in my judgment, to widen, if you like, the net. And that's why I think this minded look at 15% is a good idea. And I just love the idea of Mary's, actually. I mean I think schools is where it all kick-starts, basically. So anything you can do, working with schools, it's got to be a good thing, actually. I'm sure it's already in your agenda anyway. So I think this is a wonderful report. I think we're asked to note the impact. Well, we've noted the impact, and well done. And then I think, have we got any additional views in terms of what we've said on the criteria going forward? Or are we happy with these criteria going forward? I think we're probably broadly happy,
Chair,
aren't we?
I'm happy with the criteria going forward. I think it's a good project, and I like the way I do, obviously, with the recommendations of looking further to enhance the school offer.
Yeah.
I think that would be really good.
I
Other
think
than that,
if we could incorporate that'd be a good idea, actually. A great idea. And we mustn't forget, of course, at the end of the day, the creative arts are a booming part of our economy. Yeah. So it's not just the cultural offering in terms of making people feeling good. And it's interesting how, in terms of the economic review that was done, that came out as an important element of that. So I think it's excellent. Well done. Thank you for your report. So we're now on to the Gem Town of Culture.
Right, number 2. Before I start this, can I it was very remiss about actually at the start to not thank the officers in the team as well, so the 2 Alisons and Marie Claire, for all their support. It's been invaluable, obviously, and a great team, so thank you very much. So we move on to Town of Culture, and almost seamlessly, really, because a lot of the issues that you've all raised in terms of the schools and involvement and well-being and health and well-being comes very much within this next item, really. This was a manifesto pledge, of course, as we all know, of the Mayor. It's one that I think has real opportunities for all boroughs to look for exactly the reasons that have been commented in the last item, where culture can benefit their residents. So this isn't just seeing, for example, what your offer is currently within your boroughs, or towns, and we'll come on to the definition of town, I'm sure, in the discussion. But it's looking at how you can deliver that cultural offer in different ways, in terms of health and well-being, in terms of providing culture in a different setting. For example, it doesn't have to be in your stereotypical big theatre in your town centre. So it's really encouraging all towns to think outside the box when they put this bid in. It is this pot of money that's available. If we look at the main thing, which is the timescales, so the first Town of Culture will be in 2020. Local authorities will be able to submit a single short proposal. We're very conscious that resources in all our authorities are tight. We don't want to, ask authorities to come up with a huge application process. This is about going to be 5 pages of ambitions and certain possibly events, inclusion, or cohesion, all those different kinds of things within your bid. Identifying their proposed Town of Culture and the proposed forum activity by the deadline of Friday the 1st of November. We're quite well aware that certain boroughs are identified by the name of the town, others are not. So it's within your individual boroughs to decide on a town. It might be that the town is the name of the borough. It might be that it's not. but it's for you to look together to put forward your bids. The independent panel will consider proposals of the selected proposal announced by the end of November 2019. Subject to the GMCA agreement of the GM Culture Fund, the £50,000 programme budget will be granted to the relevant local authority in April 2020. This is also about, there has been a lot of discussion about the element of competitiveness in this, but the idea with this is that this will get all local authorities, hopefully all local authorities want to have discussions around this. It will encourage engagement in what their cultural offer is currently and how they can increase that cultural offer. So we don't see it that there will be winners and losers, because we envisage that within those discussions, even those authorities that are not successful in being nominated the first time, although we are intending that it will roll over so that authorities will get it in time, that they will find projects that they can still do in that year, because they will have engaged with some schools that will still want to go ahead with the plans that they envisaged they would do anyway. So we think it will get culture at the forefront of people's minds, engaging, and there will also be a buy-in, and part of the process of the cultural funding, there will be a buy-in from those authorities that are successful to actually take part in activities within that tone of culture. So there will be a lot of those major companies will visit, and there will be an expectation that those companies that are recipients of the cultural funding will have to have a degree of participation and performance, or whatever that may be, or exhibitions in the tone of culture for that year. So I think it's a real exciting opportunity for all the things that we've said about involving different communities coming together to celebrate their own particular cultural offer for next year. And I realise totally, and we've had these conversations, that time is pretty tight to get it, but we feel it's beneficial to get the ball rolling for next year and look at opportunities that there may be moving forward. So quite happy to answer any questions.
Before I throw out the question, can I ask one clarification? The concept I think is great. But if, let's say, and I'll just pick two towns at random, take your own authority, Bolton. It's a big town, city. Do you know, I don't even know. Is Bolton a city or a town? It's a town.
But we've other towns in Bolton.
No, I know that, but Bolton itself, right?
Yes.
It's a big area. If I compare that with, say, another area, which obviously I know well, but it is a town, say Haywood. Now, the disparity in size is enormous. And I struggle to understand how you do what sort of comparisons you can make. You know, because they might bring different types of offers in terms of their bid to become a cultural town. And I struggle to understand how you could compare, say, Bolton, with the Octagon and everything else, with something that might be emerging, I don't know if it is emerging, in something like Haywood. And I just struggle on this assessment of this.
Well, that will be for the panel, obviously, Mike, but, and that's why it's an independent panel, and it will take politics out of it completely. But the criteria will not be on size, and it will not be on, it will be on an offer, and a cultural offer, and the uniqueness of that offer. And I think we are definitely moving down an avenue which is saying that, just because this is all about, and forgive those here that are from the Manchester element, but but everything is often accused of being a little Manchester centric. I'm not sure that's a fair analogy, but a lot of things is. This is something that will actually come outside the city centre, and we'll have an opportunity to celebrate it. And I actually think that there's a lot of room in other portfolios to actually copy this in a sense, because there's no being that you can't have a town of health and well-being. There's no reason why you can't celebrate the towns in our conurbation. And I do understand what you're saying. There's a huge difference between if you wanted to do Staley Bridge, or if you wanted to do Bolton, but you see within Bolton we have Horwich, we have West Horton, we have Farnworth. So we have a lot of towns. So I think that it's up to the borough, and I think every year we will make sure it goes from borough to borough. We can't say it will go to 4 different towns in a borough year on year, but we will make sure that the boroughs get as much a spread of this as possible. But I think it's within the independent, the criteria we set, that, size must not be an overwhelming criteria.
No, because otherwise the risk is you're a Salford centre competing with Bolton, with Rochdale, and all these little other townships are forgotten about. So thank you for that. Right, I don't know who was first, actually. We'll go around the table then. June first, then Danny, and then Greg.
You've just...
and then Michael.
Thank you, Chair. You've just confused me a little bit, because obviously I'm here from Manchester City Council, and Manchester is not a town, it is a city. So quite frankly, yeah. So I'm a little bit concerned that we would be excluded because we do not have townships whatsoever. We are a city and we have wards. We have 32 wards within our city. So how would, say, the likes of, I don't know, Cholton, for instance, how would they then be able to bid in? Because this is for towns, and it's not a town at all. It's a city.
Yeah, I think we will, so this is where for the places to define. So if you wanted to put forward Wythenshawe, if you wanted to put forward Cholton, if you wanted to put forward Didsbury or Openshaw, I think it is for you to define, because we're very, very, very clear. I mean, we have been going through this process like to try and get something that will work for the diversity of places that we have across Greater Manchester, and that will be about a kind of celebration of the distinctive identity of that place. And I think that whatever Manchester decides to set as its town that it wants to put forward, we would accept as eligible.
Could I then just point out, coming back, because that's actually defining, so like you've got East Manchester, South Manchester, Central Manchester, because that would be like Wythenshawe, Withington, things of that nature. That would just be defining it's not a town. So it needs to be, because when you're putting that offer in, people will then be very confused in Manchester because they are not town status. So is there a way of actually changing the wording? Because this is an offer for towns, culture of towns. It is not a culture of places. So that's why I'm a little bit concerned, because it will have an identity crisis. People say, well, it's not a town. I'm looking as Manchester.
Can I just... Yeah, I actually just want to add to what Councillor Hitchin is saying. I think this does present some difficulties. I don't want to get into semantics of it, but we don't have towns, and if you end up, as and when Didsbury wins this, calling it the town of culture for the year, will do two things. One, it will confuse people, but two, it will possibly breed resentment in other areas of Manchester that don't have necessarily that feeling of a specific district centre. So. Do we have a contingency for if a non-town wins it, calling it something else? I mean, like the district of culture, it's just going to cause confusion in Manchester, if Manchester wins.
I absolutely take your point. We, at the moment, don't have a plan B, and part of the reason we don't have a plan B is there are 97 different versions of what you would call that. I think the bit that's going to be really important is we're asking local authorities to nominate places. And what we've tried to do is there is a formal definition of towns, and there are 90 towns in Greater Manchester. What we don't want to do is to go down that route. It's areas, places, neighbourhoods where people identify as their own community, their own neighbourhood. Now, part of that, is it neighbourhood of culture? Is it ward of culture? Is it district of culture? Place? So the whole thing is quite difficult, but that doesn't stop the places that win it, how they choose to badge their events, how they choose to badge the festival, how they choose to badge what goes on in their town, their area, if they win that. It's just going to be quite difficult. The town of culture is quite a recognised... Yeah, we don't have a capital, though.
Forgive me, but the capital of culture is not the capital of the United Kingdom. It's awarded on a perennial basis to wherever somebody feels the capital of culture is. be the GM capital of culture?
I think that if we go back to the discussions or what Andy wanted to achieve with this was to give the opportunity to shine a spotlight on places and specifically towns that didn't get that profile, that really, you know, and there's an awful lot of talk about kind of left behind towns, and this for £50,000 is specifically to do that. I think if you look at the broad portfolio and all the ways in which we will invest in culture, what you will get is hopefully parity and fairness across all places. I think that we have to be quite clear that the driver for this isn't to highlight the absolute best of culture. This is to highlight the undiscovered and to shine a spotlight on a place that might not get the profile that other places do. And I think if you look at that as the driver and the lens through which you see it, it's not about a capital of culture, or, you know, because we know that 70% of I think 70% of investment of our portfolio investment goes into Manchester, organisations based in Manchester. This is to try and redress that a little bit, I think, and to try and say that you have different definitions of culture, and it's not just the kind of the theatre or the high art or the particular, you know, where the infrastructure is. It is those other things that maybe have not been profiled at a kind of a regional stage or a national stage or an international stage. If we can bring in kind of international companies to these places, if we can do that brokering. But I think that this £50,000 has to be looked at in the totality of our investment, and some of our investment is to do a particular thing. This bit of investment is to do a different thing.
We could go on debating this for ages. Yeah. I mean, can I just ask you, you know, if an application comes in from Manchester, that you treat it with pragmatism? And I think that's the way to overcome that.
I think what it is because I do know that it will cause, when it goes out across Manchester to actually bid in for this, they do not identify themselves as a town. Yeah. They identify themselves as an area, a place, an area, so like South Manchester, North Manchester, East Manchester, city centre, things of that nature. They identify themselves in that locality, like Didsbury is East and West Didsbury, you know, Wythenshawe takes in quite a number of wards. It's those type of areas that would, you know, I could foresee going forward. It would be a number of wards coming together to bid for this, not one specific, because that's part.
That's okay, because I mean, if you look at say Rochester, for example,
yep.
There are 4 wards that comprise Middleton, there are 3 wards that comprise Hayward.
Absolutely,
you know,
but
so you know, there is that scenario, which is wards, which is what I'm saying.
Yep.
You know, I'll come back in a second, the officers, but I would just ask for a bit of pragmatism in terms of interpreting these things, which I think is the right thing to do. And then, as I say, that, you know, we must make sure that the way in which this is marketed you know, to the wider community is that people will understand that if Didsbury, East and West and Central, want to make a bid, they're entitled to make that bid.
Yeah, no, it's just because it's got town. Yeah. That's all. It's that identification.
Yeah. Well, we can put it in square brackets. Sorry.
Sorry, just to sort of give some reassurance that no town, district, ward, village will be precluded, and we're really keen to ensure this is local authority led. So we would expect a debate to happen with members and with officers for them to decide whether it could be Chorlton or Wythenshawe or Didsbury or whatever it is. Yeah, obviously town gives a specific reference, but I think also It's about being pragmatic, as Chair said. So if I just give a sort of a parallel, a city of culture for the country doesn't always get a city that's put forward. So if I look at the ones that are going to put themselves forward in the next couple of years, Bradford's a city, but then you've got people where they're twinning up. So I think like Southampton and another town are twinning together. Tees Valley isn't classed as a city, but they're going to put themselves forward. So I think, yes, there'll be pragmatism, have the debate internally. We'll make sure that the team here talk to local authority officers and members to say, don't get too worried about it. And so obviously we want to just celebrate place, and whatever that place is, we'll hopefully get there.
The key thing, nobody will be excluded.
As a representative of the other city in the conurbation, I had the same issue, read the town, though we do have an Eccles Town Centre, for example, and a Walkden Town Centre and so on. A couple of points, I think, about the distinctiveness of the culture and so on. There could be certain areas in the conurbation, for example, there could be a Zoroastrian community, which is extremely distinctive, but wouldn't have any comparator anywhere else. And in terms of its distinctiveness, well, that would win hands down almost, would it not? So just wonder how you're going to sort of judge all of these things. And likewise, you mentioned something about nighttime economy. I don't know, there may well be a wonderful nighttime economy in Haywood, but there may not be, but there certainly is in Manchester City Centre, for example. Sorry. There certainly is in Manchester, for example, and probably a bit in... so I'm just worried if we're going to be sort of comparing apples and oranges, so to speak. And the other is you mentioned about rollover. If one area wins, will they be allowed to sort of bid again the next time? Because they will have significant advantage, because they'll have the extra 50 grand plus the money that'll come in from other organisations and businesses and so on. So they will be able to employ more staff and have come in with maybe a stronger sort of bid and so on. So I just wonder how we're going to sort of deal with all of those bits. Thank you.
Well, I think on the last point, the answer is no. Nobody's going to get it. I mean, I think if you get Town of Culture, I think the view is that really you'll say goodbye to that for another 9 years until everybody else has had a go. It's not in there, no, but I think that's certainly the intention. There's certainly not an intention for the £50,000 to be used into investment to be able for somebody else to be able to have a better go at it next time and to get it for consecutive years. And it's to invest in and to get match funding and to make it just a fabulous celebration for a whole year of culture. Regarding the mixed, we absolutely celebrate that there will be a mixed array of applications, and we've depoliticised that completely, and it's an independent panel being formed of both artists, people involved in the arts, etc., that will lead on this. And you know, it will be up to them to look at we will have a criteria, but it will be up to them to look at those, what they feel individually. But the idea for me will be about increasing that cultural offer that currently exists, and how you create, we've talked about legacy before in this meeting, how you create a legacy of culture moving forward that is sustainable and that is enriching for that whole town, space, area, centre that is the actual winner. So I think it will be a hard choice. I'm hoping there'll be some absolutely fabulous bids come forward that'll be varied, and all will be superb. I would imagine all be on a level that will stand alone. But I think it will be up to that independent panel to have that very difficult decision and celebrate what's on offer.
My question is about community involvement in this. So we say that it's the local authority who's going to be putting the bids in. My first question would be, can a community not put a bid in if they feel that they've got specific cultures that they want to show? The other thing as well is, I'm not going to name names of local authorities, but say like the In Bloom project in Rochdale is run mainly by, a community of different people from different areas. I know there was an authority next door, but not Oldham, don't worry. Who basically, where the local authority basically blasted loads of money into it to basically make it look nice, get the awards and stuff like that, but there was no community involvement in that at all. The problem is, I just don't want it to be all local authority based, money pumped into it by a local authority. I want it to see more community-led, community-level cultures coming forward instead of the local authority saying this is what we do.
That is absolutely what it is about. I mean, the local authority is just the custodian of the bid, and we'll get the bid in. A smart authority will involve as many communities as they possibly can, and highlight that in the 5 pages that they've got to draft. So it will absolutely. This is all about community and communities and celebration.
2 of the criteria around impact and additionality. So I think there's an expectation, although we wouldn't be on the panel, it's chaired by an independent person, we would expect communities to be at the heart of the bids. So if a local authority didn't actually engage with the communities to put in the bids, notwithstanding what the panel might say, I wouldn't see that being a strong bid at all, because delivery should be through community, and that bid should be all about the community. So it's just the way the mechanism is to sort of direct the money into the local authority and then out to communities.
I'm sorry, I think that's really important that what will happen is once the bid is in and a place is selected, there will then be a kind of co-development of the programme with a place, and where we use our resources and they use their resources, and we bring in communities to help programme, and we start targeting. So I think there will be an initial outline and ambition that will be expressed in the application, but then the actual co-development of a programme for that town and costing, we would absolutely expect community voices to be there at the kind of programming stage.
Okay, thank you, Chair. On 3.5, we've spoken a lot about the independent panel that will be making this decision. And am I right in thinking from the report that it's going to be co-chaired by Lisa Nandy and Fiona Gibson? Yeah, because just picking up on David's point, and I made a note of it, because he said he was taking the politics out of it. So it's a bit of a controversial thing that we've actually got an MP that represents one of the boroughs co-chairing it. Now, and I come from Wigan myself, so I just think it puts someone in a bit of an invidious position as well, because if Wigan get it, oh, she's feathering her own nest. If Wigan don't get it, people in Wigan will go, she's absolutely useless. Why? Someone else has got it. It's gone to Manchester again. So we're the land of the free here. So all I'm saying is that it perhaps might be better if we didn't have a politician co-chairing it, and that's the same across any party, any MP, whatever the colour is.
I'll just say I'll have a word with the mayor then.
I think that was a good answer.
Sorry, slightly parochialist, isn't it? Councillor Winstanley, as we both know, but Lisa Nandy is there in her Centre for Towns capacity, and however, I'll defer to my leader for this portfolio, and I'm sure he'll have a discussion with the mayor.
It is public perception, unfortunately, but it's anyway. We are what we are. I didn't think we'd have much debate on this particular issue. Actually, I think it's just been almost nodded through, but it's brilliant. You know, obviously there's a lot of thought gone into that. There's a lot of emotion. Interesting. I never realised that Manchester was carved up like that. I just thought of Manchester like Didsbury and Chorlton and I've worked in the centre of Manchester for 30-odd years.
It's just that, because it's 32 wards, and with it being 32 wards, it's very, very distinctive, and each ward is distinctive.
I've learned something. So it's great. I think we were asked to give you, I think in terms of the asked to provide views on the proposed Manchester Town Culture structure and process. I think we've given you lots of views. So if you can take some of those away and reflect on them, and obviously time is tight, but I think it's a great idea actually. It's still very good. No, it wouldn't do, because because we're asked to set up agree the criteria and so on. It is then an executive decision to go through that, and an independent panel will decide know who is doing it. So it's not the role of this committee to actually get involved to actually vet it. Yep. I think I'm right in saying that, aren't I?
No, our views as a committee will go forward, and they'll be considered in the report.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not that everything that you've said. The fact that,
no.
The fact that Lisa.
No. Yeah.
I
was just asking, would it be coming back? No. But all of our views will be taken on board. Absolutely. Yeah. That's the key thing. Okay.
Sorry, Chair. Could I then ask the winners of who's been appointed the £50,000, could we have a copy of who actually wins the bids? So that would be very interesting to have that back at a further date, because then we see the process from the beginning to the end.
I think if there's a rolling programme, what we will absolutely do is when we kind of report on portfolio delivery against the strategy, I think there will be an evaluation. I think that there will be different points at which you hear about this through the kind of programme of the work of the culture portfolio. I think that the specific question about will you guys see the winner before the winner is announced? No, but you will be involved in progress and updated on evaluation, and however the programme might be tweaked to reflect on the successes or maybe what didn't work quite so well in year one.
So, thank you for that. That was very interesting. So, well done. I wish you every luck in a difficult decision, actually. So the last item on the agenda is the work programme. Joanne.
Thanks, Chair. Just briefly, it's just for members to note the work programme, and just to update members, as you know, the Mayor actually agrees to come to each scrutiny committee twice a year. So we've secured his attendance for the November meeting and the March meeting. We've also asked the Chair of the LEP to attend the November meeting, and that's been agreed. And from the previous discussions, I think it was last year, we talked about a visit to Manchester Airport as a committee, and we're looking perhaps towards February for that to happen. Also, we've got some future items for consideration. One would be the Northern Powerhouse and a general update when we have a little bit more information around that. And also the local industrial strategy. So I'm not sure. Yeah. So obviously that's on our agenda. We're not sure when that will come, but it is relevant to the committee. And the Chair mentioned at one of our briefing sessions the local industrial strategy. How would members feel about a member briefing around the local industrial strategy and what it's about and what it delivers? So we could look at perhaps looking at that.
Which isn't really scrutiny, so we do it outside of the meeting, so it would be an extra half an hour beforehand, perhaps.
I think it would be very beneficial to all members to actually have that briefing.
In general terms, I think if things we want briefing on that's relevant, we could organise that as well. Sorry, Danny.
Just, would it be outside of the meeting if I wanted to recommend something for the work programme? No. So I don't know whether this has been in the work programme before or if I've missed it, but I'm trying to think of the words to use here, sorry. So obviously electric cars, just about the generic plan going forward for Greater Manchester in regards to the electric charging stations. Would that be for this committee? I can imagine it's infrastructure and economy.
Yeah, it's actually on housing, plan and environment.
Oh, right, okay. So but it goes over into that, doesn't it? Because it's that infrastructure and economy. So yeah.
I think it's one of the issues. I mean, sometimes things that affect the economics of the area, which is our area, then they cut across into other over in scrutiny committees, and it's sometimes difficult. But interesting, we had a meeting yesterday, the three chairs, together with the mayor and his political assistant, just to understand what we should be looking at from a point of view of the scrutiny committees. And when we work that out, we'll obviously bring that back here, for your approval. And we should be now aiming for the next meeting to have a final definitive work programme for the rest of the year. I mean, we're almost there, but I think there are a couple of things that need to be slotted in, and somebody is getting agreement with, for instance, there's an idea of should we go to the airport as an example.
I'm just looking at the work programme and the Brexit update. I can't see there being any further advancement on the Brexit update. So, I know, because we need to. Yeah, it's a live document, so I understand that, but I'm just wondering, I don't want it to fall off the agenda, because just in case there is any announcements further on that we need to find out, but I'm just not sure how much time would be spent on this one, and if there's anything that we can move forward then, if that one's not going to be debated on.
I'll start again. Sorry about that. Work programme. Okay. Right. We heard today. I'd be grateful if there are any gaps around February, March. Going into next year. I was very persuaded today. I didn't ask questions about it. That the paper that we got, we had two papers, but the first paper we took on culture, there's a section in it that starts to talk about value for money. It talks about outcomes. It actually talks more about giving us a further detail on what I call process, actually. Outcomes, did we achieve what we set out to achieve? But we did in the conversation get more into the whole business of social outcomes. How it impacts on people's lives in the sense of what we might even set out to hope it can achieve, improvements in well-being, that sort of thing. And the chief executive that was with us spoke to the fact that she has a lot more detail on that. Now, I would like, if they would be agreeable, I would actually like them to do a brief paper or just come here, do PowerPoints and run through that with us, because I've not had that before. So that's more of an item on economic outcomes of culture, because they've told me today that they do have that. And I did see some work that I was very persuaded by on social prescribing and outcomes, quite rightly. I know we don't do health here, but we do culture. So this is just an example for committee members, where it was quite clear to me that one of the best economically evidenced, it's something I'm very interested in, the whole business of economic evidence for doing things and why, was actually on the arts, was a wonderful programme that was arts-based, actually. Social prescribing can be about many things, sports, community, and so on. And I really noticed that when I was looking into what I call the research, evidence-based, knowledge-based, whatever members prefer to call it. I thought, I'm going to have a look here at the academic knowledge base on social prescribing, and right at the top, for England, the most rigorous was on the arts, and I thought, whoa. So, obviously, and with it coming up today, I thought that would be, if they would want to do it, I would appreciate that subject, just to look at that side of culture.
Maybe, Chair, that's a good item as a member briefing, isn't it? If you want to look in much more detail, rather than scrutinise it.
I don't know. You've not persuaded me on briefing, and I'll tell you why. Because I didn't ask questions today. Obviously, we had a lot of other subjects. Because for me, when they give us economic evidence of the benefit, it highly persuades me on whether we want to invest. Because, whether we're investing enough finance, some might say there might be hard decisions going forward about where money goes. So it does speak to how much finance I'd want to see the GMCA put into culture. Yes? I'm interested in what you get. Value for money, it was mentioned. So I can't say all I want is a briefing that's not on camera where I can't formally ask questions about the benefits of something. I'm sorry. I would be very happy to have... It felt like they've got information. So I'm going to stick with an ask on that for scrutiny. Thanks.
The reason I was to say a briefing was that because we don't understand it, basically, what they actually do. They always got information. It might be better to have that first. And then, if it's appropriate, which it may well be, then we actually do some scrutiny on that. But we need to understand, first of all, what are we scrutinising?
Yeah, but forgive me, I've tried to be clear. I have some basic understanding across any subject of what I mean by economic outcome. Outcome, just use that word outcome, for what you've chosen to do and why, okay? And it's no surprise that I come here to a scrutiny committee. You know, a subject like this suits me. And may I say yourself, actually, Chairman, have got some background in some of the subject matter. So I can't... So I'm very happy to just ask generalised questions about the matter of outcome in terms of arts spending and culture spending.
I've not got a problem with what you're saying, Susan. That's all I'm saying. I'm not sure what they actually measure and what information they've got. And that's why I think we need to understand that first. Now, if they haven't got that information, the next question is, should they have that information? So I think we need to explore it, right? Chair, the Vice Chair, myself, Chair, myself, Vice Chair, myself, and Susan would explore it, and we'll to find out what's there, and we'll get you into the loop if we can do. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, I wasn't planning to come back. I know that they gave me some information today because I listened. That's, you know, that they have an interest in outcome information and that they keep it. Thanks.
Yeah, good. Okay.
I was just going to support Susan in the endeavour of what she's trying to get to this meeting so we can have a look, because there is quite a lot on that. Social prescribing does have an economic impact in this region, and quite frankly, to know some of the cultural aspects that we're doing social prescribing does have a knock-on effect on the health and local businesses and things of that nature. So it would be really, really beneficial to see how we move this item forward. I'd like this to actually be pinpointed down further and as an item on the agenda, please.
So when you were speaking before, because I've got a digital hearing, no.